Hello ladies and gentlemen and movie lovers of all kind, and welcome to a Let's Discuss video. And as always, I am your host, Brett Murphy, and for today the topic of discussion is going to be who is the most influential director of the 2010s. Now the whole idea between these discussion videos is to get a discussion going. I pick a topic, I cover the topic, I give you my opinion on it, but more importantly I'm looking to see what your opinions are down in the comments. That's the whole point of these videos, is the back and forth, where a video essay is more so me talking to you and giving you information. These videos are more meant for a back and forth. So how today is going to go, I am going to give you a list of directors who I consider to be the best of the 2010s, as well as list off all of their movies that they released between 2010 and 2019, and then give you my opinion on who out of that list I consider to be the most influential. So without further ado, let's hop right into things. Those up for consideration were Edgar Wright, who released Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, The World's End, and Baby Driver. Martin Scorsese, who released Shutter Island, Hugo, The Wolf of Wall Street, Silence, and most recently, The Irishman. Steve McQueen, who released Shame, 12 Years a Slave, and Widows. Damien Chazelle, who directed Whiplash, La La Land, and First Man. David Fincher, who gave us The Social Network, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Gone Girl. Alfonso Cuarón, who dropped Gravity and Roma. Alex Garland with Ex Machina and Annihilation. Wes Anderson with Moonrise Kingdom, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and Isle of Dogs. Catherine Bigelow, who showcased Zero Dark 30 and Detroit. Jordan Peele coming in with Get Out and Us. The Russo Bros swinging in with Captain America the Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame. Taika Waititi dropping by with Boy, What We Do in the Shadows, The Hunt for the Wilder People, Thor Ragnarok, and Jojo Rabbit. Rian Johnson with Looper, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and Knives Out. Quentin Tarantino delivered Django Unchained, The Hateful Eight, as well as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Alejandro G. Inarritu with Beautiful, Birdman, and The Revenant. Greta Gerwig with Lady Bird and Little Women. Denis Villeneuve coming at you with Incendies, Prisoners, Enemy, Sicario, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049. And lastly, but certainly not least, Christopher Nolan with Inception, The Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, and Dunkirk. Now that's a pretty hefty list if you ask me, and most of them are pretty fresh faces. They've only really come on in the last decade or two. Really, aside from Martin Scorsese. A lot of things go through my mind when I look at this list. The things that I take into consideration are of course my own personal opinions, but when I'm thinking most influential, I'm not just thinking for myself. I'm also looking at things like reviews, box office numbers, how frequently I see people discussing it on Twitter, how many other people have made videos about these movies, have they come up in any of my various film courses, the sort of reach that these films have had. I'm looking at a pretty wide spectrum of things. When I think of Edgar Wright, I think Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, one of the most underrated comic book movies ever made. The World's End, the perfect way to cap off the Cornetto trilogy, and Baby Driver being one of the slickest action movies ever put to the screen. Then you go to Martin Scorsese, and he's frickin' Martin Scorsese. His movies sell on name alone. Shutter Island to me was him actually trying something new. It was a really more of like a horror thriller movie versus his typical kind of gangster mobster type movies. Hugo was an excellent kids movie. The Wolf of Wall Street is my personal favorite pick out of his catalog. Silence was a very thought-provoking film. And The Irishman was of course an instant classic, and I really feel like people haven't appreciated it as much as they should have due to the length of the movie. But I really do feel like over the coming years it's going to be studied just as much as movies like Goodfellas. Steve McQueen gave us Shame, which is it's an interesting movie, and one you certainly shouldn't watch with your parents. 12 Years a Slave is a brutal and relentless harrowing journey. And Widows, I wasn't really a fan of Widows, but I know a lot of people really did enjoy it, so that's why I made sure to include it and give it a little bit of love. The performances were great, but it just really wasn't for me. Damien Chazelle is like 2.5 out of 3 for me. Whiplash is one of my favorite movies of all time. La La Land I liked, didn't love, and First Man I thought was criminally overlooked. And has one of my favorite film shots ever. That moon landing when he first steps out and all the sound just cuts out. God, just goosebumps just thinking about it. David Fincher is another one that you can look at and really give name recognition alone. The Social Network is a masterpiece when it comes to real life storytelling. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was okay. And Gone Girl was an engaging thriller from beginning to end. When it comes to Alfonso Cuarón, Gravity is probably the most realistic space film we've had to date. And I mean, I didn't love Roma personally. I know like some people are like, but like it wasn't the subtitles. I'm fine with movies with subtitles. I loved Parasite. I don't know if it was kind of like the black and white. Maybe it was just kind of the fact that the movie felt like it was really, really slow in my mind. I didn't connect with it as much as I wanted to. Alex Garland dropped two of the most disgustingly underrated sci-fi films ever released. Ex Machina is truly something special, and Annihilation came out 2 whole years ago, and it still has me thinking about it. Wes Anderson, when it comes to Wes Anderson, I feel like you have to be a certain type of person to really enjoy his movies. I really love Isle of Dogs, Grand Budapest, and Moonrise Kingdom. Again, I can't really speak for everyone on this. They're pretty well reviewed, but I know there are lots of people that just don't like his style. Personally, I enjoy it, but it really isn't for everyone. Catherine Bigelow followed up her Oscar winner, The Hurt Locker, with her 2 films released in the 2010s, which were Zero Dark 30, which I personally really, really like. I find that last little bit to be like hold your breath for a half an hour if you can without passing out challenge. It's just a total nail biter, and then adding the night vision goggles and stuff, it made it kind of cool almost, but you know that it's real, so it made it really intense. And Detroit, which is another true story that I feel like not a lot of people saw. It is a bit slower of a movie, but it is very, very well acted. Jordan Peele, the guy from Key and Peele, surprising everyone by releasing one of the best horror movies ever made, being Get Out. And then Us was hit or miss for people. It was like kind of a miss, sort of a hit at certain points with me. And then I know a lot of people, it was a huge, huge hit. It was on their top 10 of the year, maybe top 10 of all time. And then other people, it was a complete misfire and they just hated it. The Russo bros are included on here for 2 reasons. I am openly a movie and superhero nerd, okay? I'm an MCU fanboy, but I'm also a DC fanboy. I enjoy everything, okay? I enjoy superhero movies in general. But these are the 4 best MCU movies, okay? And when you have, 22, 23 movies at this point, to have 4 of the best be directed by these 2 guys is very impressive. And they're 4 of the best reviewed movies in the MCU as well. The Winter Soldier isn't your typical MCU flick. While it does have its big action set pieces, it incorporates a lot of espionage in it to mix it up as well. Civil War might be the most emotionally charged of any of the MCU flicks. And let's just face it, Infinity War and Endgame are basically one movie, but they were both the culmination of everything over the last decade that the MCU has done. Not to mention, Endgame is currently the highest grossing movie of all time, so of course that can't go unnoticed either. I feel like Taika Waititi is the people's champ of sorts. Everybody just loves him. I mean, he's quirky, he's zany, and he's very personable. He's just not afraid to be who he is. He's just unapologetically him. I never saw Boy, but What We Do in the Shadows is such a fantastic mockumentary. You have to see it, okay? I feel like the comedy is for a certain type of people, but the comedy just hit with me. Basically, it's like, what would you do if you put vampires and werewolves in modern times, and then you just put cameras around them at all times? It's absolutely hilarious. Hunt for the Wilder People was an indie hit. Thor Ragnarok is probably the most colorful, imaginative, and funny MCU movie to date. And Jojo Rabbit was an undeniably quirky flick which also awarded Waititi his first ever Oscar. Rian Johnson gets a lot of flack for The Last Jedi, but, you know, Star Wars The Last Jedi is the only Star Wars film to stray away from the typical formula. It took the ideas that J.J. Abrams set, turned them on their head, and gave people something they didn't expect. Did it piss a lot of people off? Yeah, sure, but I certainly admire the fact that he had the backbone to do that. Not to mention, it's easily the best looking Star Wars film ever. Looper is on my top 50 of all time and is one of my favorite action sci-fi flicks. And Knives Out is easily the best whodunit film. Quentin Tarantino, another one you can sell on name alone, released Django Unchained, which is my personal favorite movie of all time as it currently stands. The Hateful Eight, which was a slog to get through, but it was kind of a worthwhile slog, I guess. It was a slow burn film, but it was also very intense and kept you engaged for the majority of its runtime. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I wanted to love, I only liked, didn't quite love, but I feel like once it sits with me for a bit longer, I watched a couple more times, I think I can kind of learn to love it. Alejandro G and Ari 2, never saw Beautiful. Birdman, I think it's a really good movie, okay? I would even go as far as to say it was great, but I feel like it's very, very overrated, I must say. I definitely don't think it deserved to win Best Picture by any means, but I think it's worth checking out, and I have to recognize the fact that the movie was edited to look like one shot, and it was done very impressively. And The Revenant, it did some things really well. It was very well shot. It was, honestly, I really thought it was cool that they used all natural lighting. Plus, it finally netted Leo his well-deserved, long overdue Oscar. Greta Gerwig giving us Lady Bird and Little Women. With those two, you have to recognize that she's bringing women to the forefront, and it's something that's very much needed in Hollywood right now. Whether you love or hate these films, I think it's very important that you recognize what she's trying to do here. And that for the majority of people, she is succeeding. Both of these movies were nominated for Oscars. She's done an outstanding job at showcasing what she set out to do. Now, as for Denis Villeneuve, I never saw Incendies, but Prisoners is Hugh Jackman's second best performance, one of the best performances from Jake Gyllenhaal, and one of the most gripping films of the last decade. Enemy I also never saw, but I am very intrigued by the idea of it. Sicario I feel is severely overrated. I just found it boring, honestly. Like, I never really vibed with it, to be honest. Arrival is outstanding with its storytelling and its main ideas, with an exceptional ending. And Blade Runner 2049, it's a very exceptional movie. And then once again, last but certainly not least, is Christopher Nolan. Inception did something that movies never did before. It had such a bewildering idea, and it still has people discussing its ending to this very day. The Dark Knight Rises was a perfect finale to the Dark Knight trilogy, and I said what I said. Interstellar is probably the most mind-melting, but also somehow really heartfelt journey ever. And Dunkirk, I feel like by now my thoughts are pretty well known about Dunkirk. I don't love this movie. I feel like it's a glorified documentary, but it was very much so an Oscar darling. A lot of people found it to be remarkable. I wasn't among them, but hey, you know, it is what it is. After going through all that, my final five would probably be Martin Scorsese, because he's Martin Scorsese and I loved everything he put out. Taika Waititi, because he's the people's champ. Quentin Tarantino, mostly because he put out my favorite movie of all time. Denis Villeneuve, because he's so unexpected. He doesn't just stick in the same genre that he knows. He is always trying new things. Every movie he comes out with is him trying something different. And they're almost always huge hits. Now, they're never big financial successes, but when it comes to audiences and critics, we adore it. The people who do see it adore it. And Christopher Nolan, because he's Christopher freaking Nolan. I feel like he's recently made a name for himself bigger than anyone has ever expected. On every single one of his trailers now you see from Christopher Nolan. He did that in the last decade or so. But having to pick just one, it was so close for me. I managed to whittle it down to the last two, being Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve. They've just both, in the last decade alone, put out so many movies that are on my top 50 of all time list. It's so difficult. It's like picking a favorite child. I feel like it's kind of a back and forth battle. Denis Villeneuve is always trying new things, but Christopher Nolan has made such a huge name for himself. He's become a household name over the last decade. I feel like people ponder more over Denis Villeneuve's movies, especially where he has such a wider variety, but Nolan's movies are undeniably bigger, and Inception and Interstellar pose bigger questions. The Dark Knight Rises, like The Dark Knight before it, is not your typical superhero movie. And Dunkirk, while again, I didn't personally love, it really hit home with a lot of people. On average, I would say Denis Villeneuve is a bigger hit with critics. Audiences, it's probably very close. But when it comes to the box office, Christopher Nolan reigns supreme. For instance, for Denis Villeneuve, Blade Runner 2049 was considered a massive financial flop. And a lot of his other movies either break even or like just make their budget back or make like a little bit more, like a little bit of a cushion, but none of them are massive financial successes like any of Nolan's films. It's really tough, like I'm being pulled back and forth by the two of them. But when it's all on the line, if I had a gun to my head, and right now where I am on camera, I have to give an answer of just one. And if I were to pick just one, I would have to go with Christopher Nolan. Why? Just look at all the reasons that I said. This man managed to make a massive name for himself. Soon enough, if not already, he will be considered among the likes of Spielberg, Scorsese, or many other of the big Hollywood heavy hitters. His movies are big financial successes. They are all successes with both critics and audiences. Almost every single one of his movies, 3 out of the 4 that he put out in the last decade, are on the IMDb top 250 of all time. And Inception and Interstellar in particular pose such big, dynamic, and engaging questions. The endings of both Inception and Interstellar are studied meticulously to this very day, and they will be thought about long after all of us are gone. So that's it for the discussion today, folks. My personal pick for the most influential director of the 2010s is Christopher Nolan, but now I want to know who is your pick, and more importantly, why? And I am very excited to hear all of your answers and engage in the comments with you. So if you like this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and hit that little bell icon, that way you can be notified about all of my latest uploads. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and that's a wrap. Hey you, yeah you, if you made it this far, just know I appreciate you, and while you're here, consider hitting that subscribe button.